pass that on to all the family members because for the most part we're in the service as well. I was in SAC. Let's see if I can make this thing work. What's it doing? Try to go to the next slide here. Oh, I thought that was all. There we go. I was in SAC at that time. SAC discontinued their command in '92, but in '68 it was still a big part of our national defense. The Minuteman obviously was named after. This is the how it began. Let's go to my career in the Air Force. I graduated from college in '67. At that time, since I graduated, I was told me about the Air Force, so I took the officer training school exam and was accepted by the Air Force. I went to Lackland in November of '67. That was about 3 days before Thanksgiving, if I remember it right. And graduated from OTS in February of '68 as second lieutenant. They sent me off then for missile training at Chanute Air Force Base, which is around Illinois, about 150 miles, I think, south of Chicago. We spent about a month there learning what they considered unclassified. It was interesting because we'd go so far and then they'd say, you'll learn that at your next assignment. So during that process, we had filled out paperwork for the Air Force to do background checks. We all had to qualify to have a top secret crypto security clearance. The names that I put on the list of people to contact really weren't the ones they talked to. They would talk to other people in the area. And anyway, it didn't take long, but I got my security clearance. So we were off to Vandenberg for about another 6 weeks of training there, which included classified training about the Minutemen. After that, I was permanently assigned to Ellsworth Air Force Base, Rapid City, South Dakota. And I was there during my whole time, except for 2 more TDYs at Vandenberg. What I looked like going through officer training school, I can tell by the shoulder boards I was an upper. Kansas, they like to put things in the newspaper, and I thought that was an interesting article. I grew up on a farm, actually. There's a picture of my mother and dad there on the right, and you can tell my father was a farmer by his farmer's tan. Left side, it was a very cold war that I was in. That's my wife's little bug. It was so cold that actually in the coldest part of the winter, it was easier to scrape the ice off the inside of the window than try to run a defroster. Probably one of my happiest moments or best accomplishments at all time we were there was the birth of my daughter. And she kind of complains that when she fills out applications that ask for her birthplace, Ellsworth Air Force Base, Rapid City, South Dakota, it doesn't fit on most of the forms. The interesting other thing about this picture is that when I first started, we wore white coveralls. I think that was a carryover from the missiles early on of missiles wearing white coveralls. Later on, you'll see the dark blue uniform, which is much more comfortable and actually looked quite a bit better as well. I also have the instructor patch there. Okay, let's talk about the Minuteman missile. There were actually 6 bases. There were 1,000 Minuteman missiles in these 6 bases. Malmstrom had 200, and Cheyenne or F.E. Warren had another 200. The other 4 bases each had 150 apiece. The distinction between the black and the red is that the red ones are still active. There are, I've seen 2 numbers. It's either 400 or 450, and 450 sounds more appropriate, but the red bases there still have about 150 each, and they're Minuteman IIIs. Okay, this is the Ellsworth layout. I was in the 68th Strategic, and I guess the significance of that location would be on the lower left corner is actually the Black Hills in that area, and you'll see in the lower port of that box with the strategic the 68th is Sturgis, which is famous for any of you who are motorcycle fans. They have that gathering there. Over in the 66th, a strategic missile wing, since Ellsworth is the missile part of it's no longer active, when you get down along there where it says Cactus Flats and Delta 1 is now a national parks, and you can actually take tours of the site and the missiles, and see a missile as well as as the capsule. Famous thing of Black Hills, just thought I'd throw that in. This is what the Minuteman missile looks like. It's 3 stages and only has about 3 minutes of powered flight. Each stage takes about a minute. There's kind of a layout. This is actually a Minuteman III, but the Minuteman I and II were very similar in their design. The interesting thing about the solid fuels in these Minutemen was that it didn't burn from the bottom to the top. It actually had a star pattern all the way up through each stage, and it would burn from the inside out. And that's the way the Minuteman powered itself. As you can see, about number 4 there, it is actually reaching semi-orbit. It's getting out of the control of the atmosphere. Interesting chart here I found shows how many of the nuclear warheads that the U.S. and the Russians had in comparison. The U.S. not only had the Minuteman, but we also had bombers that carried nuclear weapons. These are the long-range missiles, or long-range bombs anyway, and also the nuclear subs. Some subs had 16 tubes and some had 20 tubes, I believe. You Navy people will probably know better than me. Anyway, I thought it was pretty interesting, the significant numbers of nuclear weapons. And we still have quite a few, close to 4,000 or around 4,000. Okay. When I went to Ellsworth, I was assigned a crew. I became the deputy to commander. There were the two officers that went on alerts to the briefing room as a crew. We got status updates, which, but could be anything from the weather to who was coming to visit or whatever. But the other thing that was significant, I thought, at each of these gatherings in the morning in these conference rooms, we had to decode a emergency war order message to make sure that we had the skills to perform that if it came in. You would do it independently, then compare with your crew member. Then we were assigned from that point how we were going to get to the launch control centers. Hopefully we fly. The Hueys, the 1H, or the regular Hueys. But if the weather was not capable for them to fly, then we had to drive. And we had a bunch of Ford station wagons that I remember back then. And they usually had a big box in the back of winter survival gear. When you arrived at the launch control center, you would check in with security. They would make sure, then they would notify the crew downstairs that you were coming down. You would descend into the capsule. They would have the door open and you could make your way in and then start changeover, which included, they would pull their locks off the safe. You'd look inside to make sure the keys and the sealed documents were included in there, and then you would put your locks on the safe. The crews were required and carried anytime anyone was coming into the capsule. They would have a .38 caliber. We always had the .38 Smith and Wessons. After the crew changeover and they left, you close the door and settle in for hopefully just a 24-hour tour. You take turns resting, eating meals, and monitoring the missiles for security and maintenance. You often would practice the checklist that you have to go through, and a number of people actually were studying for their master's degree or whatever, and they would have their schoolwork to take. This is what the Launch Control Center looked like from the air, hopefully coming in with the helicopter. They had a lot of different kinds of communication. That's why you see all the antennas and different things there. These were pretty isolated, and you can see they had their own sewage lagoon out there in the back, and so forth. This is what the Launch Control Center looked like from the ground, the support building on top. There were eight personnel in this building when everybody was in the building. There were the manager of the facility. He took care of everything, painting wood, mowing the lawn or whatever there happened to be there. And then there were 6 security people, and they took turns every 12 hours. There'd be a security guy right in that window that you see there by the door, and he would pretty much be there the whole 12 hours. He would have 2 security team that could rove around at all the launch sites, at all the missile sites. And if the crew downstairs got a warning that something was going on, that he would send them out to look at, see what was happening. Then there was a cook. That was be the eighth guy. The officers were all downstairs. Here's how they would be in their capsule down below. I've heard anywhere the depths varied between on the capsule location. Some of them were as shallow as 30 feet. I heard some were as deep as 120 feet. All that support material. The interesting thing about the capsule floor itself was it actually was suspended on shock absorbers, so that if the ground pretty bad, the capsule floor would not move that much. And this is what where the missile was and what it looked like. That was a large covering over. Well, as you can see, it had kind of a sloped front there, so that if it was jerked if there was happened to be snow or debris or whatever, it could clear it out of the way. There's also surface monitoring equipment and antennas you can see there that were to monitor if anything was going on above, and then there was also another security system that monitored if anything was intruding into the launch tube. And this is how that layout. And that's what it looked like. A lot of these slides I got off the internet. I sure didn't take them when I was there. This is the 8-ton door that goes into the capsule. With typically things, this was a pretty serious business, but every once in a while somebody came up with a little thing to lighten things up a little bit. So off here, let's see, I'm not sure whether I can mark it or not. This area right here says no lone zone, 2-man concept, mandatory. In other words, there could never be a situation where you only had one officer down there. You had to have at least 2. That was a heavy door, and it was, I don't think picture of it, but there were actually levers inside there where you had to pump out these pins so that they would lock in place. This is what you got to see when you're walking inside. Racks and racks of computer stuff. Conditioning, air blowing into the racks, not necessarily for crew comfort, but for keeping the equipment cool. On the left side here is the bunk and the curtain that goes around it for us to nap. It was kind of noisy and a little hard to get a very good rest. This is keys and the security. The emergency order documents were kept and as you can see, there's 2 locks on there, one for the commander and one for the deputy. That's me, and that had to have been pretty early in my career because I was still wearing the white coveralls. Behind me and close to that door there is actually where the commode was, and a little sink. This is the deputy's console again. As you can see, it's old enough that they still had dial phones. The other part of this that's significant is that 10 row of switches that you see there, those were the enabling switches for the missiles. If you were going through your checklist and as we agreed then that we were going on to launch, then each one of those switches had to be flipped up and the keys turned on. The other thing, over here on the very left, about the third row, and you see the little red rectangle around, that's where the deputy's key went. And this is again another picture. These safes or boxes were in different places on different in different areas for each launch control center. I know the ones that we usually went were actually on the floor by the cot. These locks were later on locks that they used. Speed was important in getting these, getting to your documents and to your keys. So they later on put these kinds of locks on the boxes. They had 4 dials underneath, and each officer set their own combination, and these were quite a bit quicker. This was the original lock that I had, and you can tell that dialing it back and forth the way you would take quite a bit of time. Time being seconds, still the idea was speed. This is what the commander's console looked like. They're under the blue, dark, that blue color. There are 10 rows of lights for each of the 10 missiles. Usually the top light was a green one, and they would say you're clean and green. If there was anything going on, sometimes it would be maintenance type things. You would see different lights when you were on alert. And you're in you got all kinds of indicators. The security warning lights are the bottom 2 lights there, which would indicate whether you had a surface motion or some kind of an intrusion, and that's when you would send out the security teams. I will on the next slide here, I'll show you where the commander's key went. When you got your emergency war order, there would usually be an indicator whether you were going to use war plan A or B, and that's when the switch would be if you needed to. The far right switch there is actually if you got a launch indicator coming on to your console that had not been authorized, you had the ability to inhibit the launch, and that's what that switch was designed for. This particular panel actually had codes in it, and each one of the 5 launch control centers in the squadron had a slightly different code. They often talk about having 2 officers to turn the keys to launch. It actually, under normal conditions, would take 4 officers. 2 officers in this capsule and 2 officers in another capsule would all have to agree to send out the launch commands before a missile would launch. This is how they hauled out the missiles to the field. Or hauled them back in if they were bringing one in. And the interesting thing about it was that the warhead was not attached in this truck. This is what they would look like when they were into the silo or whether they were hauling them out. And that was all done by maintenance crews. This is the vehicle that they hauled the warhead in, and it's parked over a silo right there. That I think is probably not painted the right color, but it was the only picture I could find that showed the helicopter that we've used for shuttling us back and forth. Any significant things that happened during my career in the Air Force, one of them is I actually got to launch a missile out of Vandenberg. I was selected with my missile commander, and another crew of 2 men were taken to Vandenberg. They pulled a missile out of a silo in South Dakota, hauled it out to Vandenberg, and stuck it back in a silo there in Vandenberg, and we waited until we got the proper instructions to launch. As I told you before, they would not launch with just 2 officers. You had to have 4 officers, and since we only had 1 capsule at Vandenberg, they had to take that panel where the commander's key goes. After we inserted our keys and turned the launch command, then they had to pull that panel out, put another one in, and let the other crew turn their keys. Therefore, it got the 2 launch commands that it needed to launch out. In most cases, including this one, we had no idea where it was going. That was somebody else's, and it was not our need to know. Another thing that happened, I told you it was a Cold War. We went out one weekend to 24 hours, and we got snowed in. So we were there for 2 days. And so we were supposed to go back out shortly thereafter, and they said, well, since you were out for 2 days, we'll let you wait and go out again a little later. And we were fortunate enough when that happened that we were there for a 3-day blizzard. So we got, in about a week there, we got 5 days in all. Code pack changes. They changed the packs in the missiles and in the commander's console periodically. I don't remember the exact sequence, but you had to have 2 officers carrying these secret code packs to the missile sites for them to change them in and out. And the maintenance crew did that. And it was also that 2-man concept, so you had to keep your group together so that nobody was there solo. Later on, they decided that they wanted to put the Minuteman IIs into the sites where the Minutemans had been. They referred to that as Minuteman Modernized. They selected me to be an instructor for those crews, and my deputy and I went to Vandenberg again to take about a 6 course, I think, in learning the differences between the Minuteman I and the Minuteman II, become proficient and be evaluated. So I went back to Ellsworth after that and was an instructor for the new crews coming in that were Minuteman II crews. I was there for up until about the time I left. They had not brought up any Minuteman II sites, and just about the time I was leaving is when the first sites came up and the crews went back out on alert. The Minuteman crews were actually evaluated at least twice a year, and to go through an evaluation in a simulator. and you had your own local people who did those evaluations. We were also under 15th Air Force headquarters, which was at March at that time, and they would periodically come in and evaluate crews. And then you had the famous ORI, the Operational Readiness Inspections, that came out of SACA in Omaha. And they would evaluate the crews as well. So I was evaluated 17 times in the time that I was there, 68 to 72, which interestingly enough, I guess set a record for that particular squadron. They never had anybody who had had highly qualified evaluations 17 times in a row. There was usually enough mistakes that you only became qualified, or if you busted, then you had to be reevaluated and take the evaluation until you passed it. If you want to see more and actually take a video tour of the Launch Control Center and the missile site, actually go to YouTube, and there is a video that shows you Delta One and the Launch Control Center. It's fairly interesting. It's kind of long, and some of the sound is not the greatest, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like in a video. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Looking Glass. It's an airborne launch control center. Aboard is usually a general and several crews, including a missile crew. This was the only way that a missile crew could actually flight pay. They would go above these. They actually flew continuously for, I think, 29 years. There was one of these airplanes in the air for that long, and they had the capability of launching missiles should the launch control centers be disabled. There was actually another thing which I didn't mention, but there was a way for the sole survivor launch control center missiles as well. I told you it took 4 officers to turn the keys to get anyone launched. It actually could be launched by just one crew in a sole survivor situation. The other crews were gone, and the missiles would stay. They only had one contact. They were then on a delayed launch, so that would happen as well. Otherwise, it would be the Airborne Launch Control Center, and that was their patch. I brought a couple of pictures here of actual launches. These were at Vandenberg. The interesting thing about this one is they always talked about how when one of those missiles launched, it blew a smoke ring. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And then this is another launch out of Vandenberg to show you the flight of the Minuteman. Yeah, the Minutemans actually had the penetration aids were staggered launches. If you had 10 missiles, they would not all launch at the same time. They would be staggered. And also later on, they had aboard chaff material, which was to camouflage the warheads from the radars. And there was even at times when they would have a decoy included. Those are some of the things that I have collected from my experience in the Air Force. You can see the missile badge down below there in the lower left corner. The first badge is your entry, and then you get the star over the top if you've been there for 3 years. And then if you've been, I can't remember exactly how long, but they actually put a wreath over it if you've been there for longer than that. And you probably know how that all works as well. I was in this. The rest of these, the missile head pointed down is the 44th Strategic Missile Wing. The one in the left side is the 68th Strategic Missile Squadron. And then I also earned the Crew Excellence 15th Air Force. I found this to be very fascinating in a sense. It's a nice statement about what is a veteran. At some point in your career, you wrote a check payable to the United States of America up to and including your life. Not enough people really realize that. So that is my presentation. Hopefully it was interesting to you. And I guess I'm open for questions.
Hey, Ken, I had an opportunity to go to that Titan Missile Museum down in Arizona.
Yes.
It looks very similar based upon your photos and stuff. And I just want to mention, if anybody has a chance, that's a pretty neat tour to take down there. I thought it was really interesting too. One of the guys giving that's a docent out there was actually on the crew, so he gives firsthand stuff. But it looked like the same, basically.
The difference between the Titans and the Minuteman was the solid fuel and the size. Actually, the Minutemans were quite a bit smaller. But the reason that the Titans and the Atlas were not as widely spread, in a sense, was they had to, when they got the orders, then they had to load the fuel and the oxidizers and all those things into those missiles. Their warheads were bigger, but it took them anywhere from 30 to an hour to load all that fuel so they could launch. The Minuteman was, you could launch it immediately almost.
Thanks.
And this is Victor. And looking at your presentation, it gave me the idea that it was very exciting, although at times might have been kind of dull. Can you share of the 4 years that you were in the force? Can you share with us the one launch at Vandenberg? Can you explain the range, the distance, the success of the launch?
Okay.
Did it target or did they blow up your missile in the air?
To be honest with you, I don't know what they did with that missile. It did not have a warhead on it. Really had some similar. The Minuteman 1 had a range of, when I was asked, I usually said far enough, but it had a range of 550 to a little more than that in distance. The Minuteman 2 had a little longer distance, and I think the Minuteman 3 is up to maybe 8,000 miles. The targets, their accuracy, I should say, got better with each of the missiles as well. The Minuteman 1, I think, was anywhere from a mile and a half inside. The Minuteman 2 was a mile, and the Minuteman 3, they say, is like 800, 900 feet. So it really gets accurate.
Thank you.
The size of these warheads were like multiple times bigger than whatever went off in Japan during the end of World War II. These were much larger nuclear warheads. The Russians they had bigger ones yet. Their accuracy was supposedly a lot less, but if you have a big bomb, it doesn't need to be too accurate. The locations being in the center of the United States and close to Canada, because they were all being launched over the North Pole. And they were also far enough from the oceans, Atlantic, Pacific, that it was hard to reach with say, a Russian submarine.
I'm sorry.
Ken, a lot of people.
I'm just curious, were all of these what we would call MIRVs, or was each individual missile just one warhead?
The warheads on the Minuteman 1 and 2 were single warheads. The MIRVs, the Minuteman 3, and usually has up to three warheads on them. That MIRV standing for multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicle. Where the T went, I don't know.
I'm wondering, from the launch coordinates, could you tell where these missiles were headed in Russia?
No, I could not, and we did not have the we did not have the coordinates of the targets. We assumed that most of them were targeted for other military installations. There were no indication that we were targeting cities. Marine base, like submarine bases, other Navy bases, other launch control centers, that kind of thing would be where the targets would be.
Hey, Ken,
Go ahead, Tom.
the regular inspections include psychological testing independent to other people coming in for those parts.
It's an interesting question because, we're dealing with extremely serious weapons. They could destroy thousands and millions of people even. Most of the psychological evaluations, as far as I was concerned, occurred before you ever got there. Once you got there, you knew what you were in for. And if there were people who decided they couldn't do it any longer, I did not know about it. Everybody that I worked with were, I guess, very competent and knew what they were in for. The one thing I didn't point out on those 6 bases, I was in South Dakota. That was considered a southern assignment. My next assignment, should I stay in the missiles, would probably have been to a northern assignment, so I would have gotten closer to Canada, I guess.
Ken, that I have a question for you based on that. Have there been any thoughts of having a base in Alaska? I mean, you're talking about north, and you're having to go over the North Pole. Would there be a benefit to do that?
The only thing that I can see based on what I can gather from it is that you would be close to the ocean. You would be susceptible to Russian submarine attack. Where in South Dakota and North Dakota, Montana, those areas, you were a far distance from the oceans.
Okay.
We're talking, this was half a century ago.
Yeah.
It's hard. Some of this is a little hard for me to remember completely.
Hey, Ken, would you have a favorite list of movies while you guys underground all the time? Was Dr. Strangelove among them?
Later on, I think they did put TVs down there, but we had no TV. They also, I think, in some of them had a little cassette player where you could play music. You had all kinds of communication, but not entertaining communication. You had ultra high frequency radio. You had the VHF, the UHF, and we actually got later on a thing that's a radio that's called the ultra low frequency radio, which I understand was used in the Navy to contact and communicate with the submarines, but it also could communicate with us underground.
So how long were you then, was it 24 hours you were down in the capsule?
Yes. You would, a day you would report early in the morning to the briefing room. You'd catch your flight or drive out. When you got there, then you would relieve the crew. Then you would go down and you would be there until the next crew came, which would be 24 hours probably, if you were lucky. Sometimes it was less. Very rarely was.
What was your normal?
Go ahead.
What was your normal entertainment? If we were down there for 24 hours.
Well, that's why a lot of the guys were actually taking correspondence courses, I guess you'd call them. University of Northern Colorado was one of the ones that supplied a master's program through there, and so you could study, read books. I suppose if you had your own cassette player, you could play your music or whatever. But it was not really exciting when nothing was going on.
So how long was your rotation then, before you went back down into the capsule?
The normal rotation was for a crew to pull about 8 alerts a month. So you pulled a couple a week. If you were an instructor, you got to pull a little less. And if you were an evaluation crew, they call them stand boards, if you were a little on one of those crews, you even got to pull a little less alerts. You spent more time in the simulators. But a regular crew would pull 2 a week.
And I was at headquarters 15th Air Force, and before you were there, but your rationale on the location was what we understood was happening. The reason why it wasn't as suggested Alaska or someplace like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they wanted to isolate them. Also, there wasn't a whole lot up there, so it was fairly easy, I think, for them to take over the land and put in the missile silos. When the area was decommissioned, deactivated, whatever you want to call it, then they turned the sites back over to the farmers for the most part, ranchers and farmers there, and they would actually dig. These cables were like 6 to 8 feet underground, and they interconnected with each missile and each other capsule in that particular squadron. And these cables were pressurized so that if you knew if anything was damaged or somebody was trying to cut the cables or whatever, you'd get alarms on that, so you knew that right away. And these cables were just left in the ground, and then eventually the farmers would dig them up and turn them into scrap. There was a lot of copper in those things.
Hey, Minot, I understand, is maybe the coldest place in the United States. Did you get up to Minot?
No, Minot, they call it?
Or
Yeah,
Minot, or what?
Yeah, I did not. But let me tell you this. My first January in South Dakota, the temperature was at some time during the day, it wasn't all the time, but at some time during the day, it was 20 below zero or colder every day for 2 weeks.
Oh,
About one of the first things they did when you got there was they put you through their winter survival training. They actually didn't put you out in the cold, but they still gave you all the training of what to do. And as I said, when you went out if you had to drive, you in the station wagon had a big wooden box in the back of it full of winter survival gear. The capsule itself had a little survival stuff in it, some water. They had a way of scrubbing the carbon dioxide out of the air if you were pretty isolated and everything went down. And we didn't talk about it much, but there was an escape tube built into these capsules, which was full of sand and was supposedly stopped just a foot or two under, maybe 3 feet under the soil, that you were able to drain the sand out and climb out. But you can imagine that most of the people thought that if there was any kind of a heat type a bomb that went off in the area, that sand would probably turn to glass. And also the cold winters and springs and summers, the expansion and contraction, they said it also crushed some of those two escape tubes as well. So it wasn't like that was much of an opportunity for the crew should they survive.
so did you have anybody having phobias about being down that far down under the ground?
I suppose there were. I never heard of them. These people were selected. You'd gone through so much getting there that if something like that were going to be a problem, you would have discovered it earlier on. But it didn't say that it didn't develop later on either. But for the most part, I did not see anybody who said, I can't take it anymore.
Say, Ken,
Aren't you know?
you had a young family. How did they fare during your assignments in there?
Repeat that, Victor. I didn't quite get it.
Your family, you had a young family.
Yes.
And now, obviously, they were in a difficult situation. What was it like for them?
Well, my wife survived. That's all. She was had to put up with a lot. You were gone a lot of the time. She was there when our daughter was born. It was interesting because they let me off of alert when she was born. Then it was like as soon as the baby was born, I was sent back on alert. We actually talked from the capsule. She was in the hospital with the new baby. I was in the capsule. We talked, and they said, she said that they're not going to let me out of here until we name this baby, because we hadn't picked the name yet. So from me in the capsule out in that far away from her, we decided on the name for our daughter, and that was how that was decided upon. Actually, kind of came as a combination from my name and her name. We named my wife is Darla. We named the baby Kayla, which is a combination of Ken and Darla.
Ken, as far as you know, do they still follow pretty much the same procedures today that you're describing here?
As far as I know, like I said, I'm talking half a century ago, and I'm sure they've made a lot of changes. Now, the Minuteman III was a much more evolved as well as its capabilities. I think they had a lot more targeting capabilities with the 3 and so forth. When I was in there, they did not have women crew members. So how they handle that addition, I don't know. I know there's some the two-person crews that are both women. There is a YouTube video that you can watch that was done in Grand Forks, I think, and that particular guy talks about the fact that he had a woman as a deputy during his, but he was much later than I was.